This began as a pastry shop complaint and ended with warships blasting a stone fortress. But first, subscribing now would demonstrate a level of personal judgment I'm simply not qualified to comment on. So it's 1832, and we're in Tacubaya, a pleasant little area near Mexico City where a French pastry chef named Monsieur Remontel runs a shop. One day, some Mexican army officers walk in, and depending on whose story you believe, they either ate some pastries without paying or they completely ransacked the place. Either way, Remontel was not pleased. He tallied up the damage and arrived at a very specific figure, 60,000 pesos, which would be reasonable, except his entire shop was worth about 1,000 pesos. So he was demanding 60 times the value of his business, which is the kind of math that makes you wonder if perhaps Monsieur Remontel had been sampling his own brandy-soaked desserts a bit too liberally. Now, most people would file a complaint, maybe take it to local authorities, accept whatever settlement they could get, and move on with their lives. Remontel decided to go bigger. He took his grievance to the French government because apparently the appropriate response to someone not paying for your eclairs is to involve an entire nation-state. And here's where it gets interesting, because the French government actually listened to him. By 1837, 5 years after the pastry incident, France had collected Remontel's complaint and bundled it together with grievances from other French nationals living in Mexico. The total came to 600,000 pesos, which France formally demanded from Mexico. Just to put this in perspective, Remontel's pastry shop claim made up 10% of an international debt demand. One bakery. 10%. The Mexican president at the time was Anastasio Bustamante y Oseguera, and he looked at this demand and said no, which, frankly, seems reasonable when someone's asking you to pay the modern equivalent of several $1 million because some officers may or may not have been rude in a bakery half a decade ago. But King Louis Philippe of France was apparently having none of it. He issued an ultimatum, and when Mexico still refused to pay, France decided the appropriate next step was a naval blockade. In November 1838, French warships showed up and blockaded Veracruz, which was Mexico's main Gulf port and kind of important for things like trade and the entire economy. The blockade lasted about 7 months, which is a remarkably long time to commit military resources over pastries. During this time, France wasn't just making a point, they were choking off Mexican commerce, turning a bakery dispute into a full-scale economic stranglehold. Then on April 16th, things escalated from inconvenient to extremely loud. French forces bombarded the fortress of San Juan de Ulúa, which sat on a reef outside Veracruz harbor. This was a proper stone fortress built to withstand attacks, and France started blasting it with naval artillery. They also occupied the city of Veracruz itself, which meant that French troops were now on Mexican soil, all because Monsieur Remontel had filed what might be the most consequential complaint in bakery history. Enter Antonio López de Santa Anna, who you might remember from other greatest hits like the Alamo. Santa Anna led Mexican forces during this conflict, and during the fighting, he took a cannonball that cost him his leg below the knee. Most people would consider losing a limb in combat to be, at minimum, a bad day. Santa Anna somehow turned it into a career boost. His role in the pastry war, leg and all, actually restored his political reputation, which had been suffering. Nothing says, "Vote for me," quite like getting parts of yourself unalived by French artillery over cake-related diplomacy. The whole conflict wrapped up in March 1839 when Britain stepped in to mediate, because apparently someone needed to be the adult in the room. Mexico agreed to pay the 600,000 pesos in installments, and the French fleet sailed away, having successfully demonstrated that if you bombard enough buildings and blockade enough ports, you can indeed collect on a pastry tab. The official name was the Franco-Mexican War, which sounds appropriately serious and diplomatic. But everyone started calling it the Pastry War, which is frankly the more honest title. The derisive nickname makes it sound silly, and it was, but it was also a real military conflict with real casualties and real consequences. People were unalived, a fortress was destroyed, an entire port was occupied. All of this happened, and all of it can be traced back to Monsieur Remontel standing in his damaged bakery in 1832, looking around and deciding that 60,000 pesos seemed about right. The truly unhinged part isn't even that France went to war over pastries. It's that it worked. Mexico paid every peso, which means that somewhere in the annals of international relations, there's a verified case study proving that if you're upset enough about baked goods and you have a navy, you can absolutely get your way. If you were Mexico in 1837, would you have paid the pastry claim immediately to avoid the war, refused on principle and accepted the consequences, or counter-offered with a lifetime supply of churros? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay unhinged.